Hello everyone and welcome to the final and last round of Chess Olympiad 2024. So India had almost already won the Olympiad, but still it was the last round and we had to finish very strong, and of course we did. We were playing Slovenia, very underdog team actually. They are seeded almost 26th and playing the final round on board 1. They were actually on the third spot before the final round and had a very good chance of getting into medals. Although their team is not really that quite strong because there's only one 2692 rated player and three 2500 players. But they were not really on India's level, so it was not a tough game for us. So for the first board, Gukesh was playing against Fedoshev, who was actually in very good form. Just beaten Magnus Carlsen in the just beat Magnus Carlsen in like 2 games before, and with the black pieces even. So it was not really easy to beat him, but of course it's Gukesh. So here Fedoshev went for d4, knight f6, and bishop f4. That is the London system. It was actually a very awkward decision because I don't know why he would go for such a variation in this kind of crucial game, but he went for it. Gukesh goes d5, e3, c5, knight f3, knight c6, knight d2, bishop g4, c3, e6, and queen a4. So it's pretty common till now. Queen a4. White is just trying to put a lot of pressure on the c6 knight and threatening knight e5 with the bishop coming to b5 and a very nasty pin. But of course, this is all theory. Black goes knight d6, knight d7, just covering the e5 square, so that if knight comes to e5, black can just take it. So Fedoshev went for bishop b5, and here black goes queen c8, just protecting this pawn. The problem with rook c8 is that white can maybe take here and go for the pawn, which I don't think you need to allow because queen c8 is enough. White goes rook c1, a6, bishop c6, queen c6, queen c6, and bc6. So this is a very strange decision by Fedoshev to go into this endgame, where black has the double bishop and a very strong center. So black can't really lose this game. He goes for c4, black plays f6, knight a4. So Fedoshev is already going wrong with his moves. Knight b3 is based on an idea of just taking on c5 and then going cd5 at the end to discover. Like for something like king f7, he would go maybe just dc5 if black goes knight c5, knight c5, bishop c5, cd5 with the discovered. But black doesn't need to go for that. Black goes a5, white goes h3, black keeps the bishop, of course. White goes king e2 and a4. So with this a4 move, this knight has to go back here, and the knight on d2 and f3 is very well dominated by the d5 pawn and f6 pawn, covering all the squares, and it is just way too good for black. Knight bd2, h5, just stopping any kind of g4, knight h5, knight h4 ideas, creating the bishop. Bishop g3, bishop e7, rook c3, king f7. So black has a very comfortable position. I don't think Gukesh could have asked for anything better from the opening. Rook h c1, rook h c8. So the point is, if white takes here, black just takes dc5 and black can just simply take bishop c5. So after dc5, black goes e5, cd5, cd5, and c6. So it looks like white is a pawn up here, but the problem is this bishop, this knight, and this knight are just very well cut off from the game by these two pawns, and you can't really move this e5 pawn, and without that you can't get knight d4 or even get this bishop here. So black goes knight b6, a3, rook a5, knight e1, rook b5. So rook is going after this pawn, which will be very difficult to defend because this bishop is cutting through the b1 h7 diagonal, stopping any kind of rook b1 or rook c2. White goes knight d3, a blunder actually. Black goes d4, takes rook c2 and rook e8. So black just utilizes this weak position of the white king, which is the only piece that is protecting the d3 knight. So if black can give a discover, the d3 knight falls immediately. White goes knight f3, rook b3, knight e1, and bishop f4. So I don't understand how Ferguson played this bad, because he went so passive with this knight f3, knight e1 variation, because that black can simply get an exchange. King f1, bishop e1, and this d3 knight falls, or the dc2 rook falls. Knight e1, bishop c2, rook c2, and d3. So with the powerful pawn on a4, powerful pawn on d3, the b2 falling, black is just clearly winning. Knight e3, rook b2, c7, knight c8, just covering the c8 square. No need for any kind of fancy stuff. White has h4, rook a2. Black is just threatening to take the a3 pawn and move and start rolling the second pass pawn. Bishop f4, rook a3, g3, rook b3, knight c4. White has to go for something like knight d6 and get rid of this knight if he wants to survive. Black just stops knight d6, knight d2, rook b2, rook c3, and this e6 rook comes to a6, getting behind the a pawn and threatening the dangerous a3, a2, a1. White goes rook a3, rook c2, knight e4, king g6, just moving out from any kind of knight g6, knight d6 checks. King g2, knight e7, king f3, knight d5, threatening to take on c7. Knight c3, knight c7, bishop c7, and d2. So Gukesh just gave up his a whole piece for the pawn, but with this white's main asset of the position, the c7 pawn is gone, and these two active rooks and connected with the passed pawns with the d2, this is just simply winning. King e2, rook e6. So if white goes something like king d3, black takes here and promotes. So king d1 and black goes rook b2, threatening rook e1 mate. If white goes knight e2, then black can go rook b1, king d2, rook b2, and then take here and take here. So after rook b2, white just resigns, because king d3, black can just take here, rook f2 and rook a4 and rook f2. Black is an exchange up, a pawn up, and this is just over. So with this win, we are already leading with 1 point against Slovenia, and this almost guarantees our gold medal here. So we move on to the next game, that is between Praggnanandhaa and Anton Demchenko. Praggnanandhaa hasn't been in the best of forms here, drawing almost 6 consecutive games, then losing to Sovesley. But here he comes back in style and beats Demchenko with the white pieces. Praggnanandhaa goes for d4. Anton plays d5, c4, dc4, knight f3, knight f6, and e3. So black goes for the accepted Queen's Gambit decline variation. e6, bishop c4, c5, castle, knight c6. So this is very common theory. White goes knight c3. White's main idea lies in going d5. Black goes a6, bishop d3, moving away so that black doesn't get b5 with a tempo. cd4, ed4, bishop e7, and bishop g5. Even though the d4 pawn is hanging, black can't really take it, because after takes, bishop b5 is there. The queen falls. So black castles, rook e1, knight d5, h4. h4 is a very interesting move. I've never seen this before. So white just says, if you take here, I can maybe even sack on h7 and take the g5 bishop with knight, and or even I can go knight g5 and just simply put a lot of pressure on the h7 pawn. Black goes h6, knight d5, queen d5, bishop e4, getting rid of the blockade on d5 and getting the bishop to e4 so that white can get d5 in the future. Black goes queen d6, bishop e3, bishop d7, queen d2 with the threat of bishop f4, f5, bishop f4, queen b4, bishop c2. So as white has provoked f5 here, the problem of isolated pawn is gone, because it is neutralized by black having the backward pawn on e6. Queen d2, bishop d2, bishop f6, Rook d1, rook d8, and bishop f4, moving away from the rook's file so that it's can be protected. Bishop e8, rook e6, knight d4, knight d4, rook d4, rook d4, bishop d4, and white goes rook e7. White's rook and two bishops are very active, but black doesn't really have too much of weakness, so black should be able to hold this position if black plays properly, but of course he doesn't. Black goes bishop c6. White exchanges a pair of bishops so that the b2 pawn is not really hanging. Bishop e5, rook e5, and here black plays g6. I think black should have just gone f4 and have like a very nice position, and it should ideally go for a draw. But black goes g6 here, which although doesn't seem like a blunder here, but I think this opened up a lot of complication in the endgame. Praggnanandhaa goes h5, g5, bishop f5. So firstly, white has managed to get a pass pawn here, doubling the black's h pawn. Even though black has a lot of play with rook d8 and rook d2, now white has starting to get something. Rook d8, bishop e6, king g7, rook h5, rook d1, king h2, rook d2, and rook f5. So white is threatening some kind of rook f7, g4, king g3, f4, f5, and put the black king in mating net. Black goes rook b2, white goes g4 first, bishop e8, king g3, rook e2, bishop b3, and now this pawn will slowly start to roll. Black goes b5, rook c5, rook e7, f4. So white is threatening f5 and then move around and play f6. Black goes king f6, rook c8, a5, rook b8. Praggnanandhaa goes exactly for my plan. Rook e3, king h4 here. I think king f2 would have been better because white just gets a simple tempo on the rook, and he can move forward with the plan with rook b6 and f5. a4, bishop d5 first, king e7, f5. If black goes for something like king d6 here, I think white can just move away from here with the threat of f6, f7. But after rook e5, white just goes rook b7. Here black blunders with king e8. I think he should have definitely gone for something like king d6 or king f6, which was much better. But he went passive here, which allowed white to get this grip on the position with bishop e6. Now the king can't really escape, and the white king is coming in with g5 and king f6. Rook e4, rook h7, just hitting the pawn. b4, rook h8, king e7, rook h6, so that black king doesn't get king g7. b3 takes a3, rook h7, king f6, and rook a7. White just picks up the other pawn, and black has absolutely nothing anymore. Bishop b5, trying to get some counterplay with bishop e2 and bishop g4. Rook a3, bishop e2, and rook a4. This stops all kind of pressure on the g4 pawn, and white is just winning with 3 pass pawns and 2 connected pass pawns. So with this win, India is already 2-0 up against Slovenia, and India has guaranteed his gold medal here. Nothing, even no one can even come into tiebreak in India, so they have just won the medal. So we move on to the third board, that is Arjun versus Jan Subeli. So Arjun was playing Jan, who is almost 400 rated below him. So this was supposed to be an easy game. So Jan plays e4. Arjun goes for the Scandinavian, which is very surprising. Jan goes d5, queen d5, knight c3, queen d6, d4, knight f6, knight f3, and g6. So this is a very common line in Scandinavian. I think I can. So white just develops his pieces and castles. Black has made 2 moves with the queen, so black is generally behind in the development. But if white can't take immediate action, then black is generally fine. White goes knight b5, queen b6, a4. So white immediately goes for something interesting. getting the knight to b5 and hitting the queen. a6, knight b3, bishop e6, stopping this knight c4 maneuver. Knight c4, bishop c4, queen c4, bishop g7, castle, castle, and c3. Here, white should have gone for this interesting a5 move, that is just gaining a lot of space on the queen side. And after queen d6, I think white should have gone for this g3, threatening bishop f4, and these two bishops cutting through the middle of the board is very dangerous for black. But white plays c3 here, c5, a5, queen c7, takes, and queen d4. So I think white is just playing for a draw, which is often the worst way we can try to get a draw against higher players, because they would pounce on you every opportunity they can get. Black goes rook c8, knight e5, e6, just covering this white diagonal. Rook a4. I don't really like rook a4 because it allows black to get black to force white getting into an isolated pawn structure. I think white can go something like bishop e3 maybe, or simply just take on c5 and go rook d1, like something like this. If black plays here, then rook d8, bishop f8, bishop h6. So after rook a4, black goes queen d4, c d4, knight c6, just exchanging this knight. And now black is actually playing for advantage. Knight c6, rook c6, bishop g5. White is just trying to get rid of the f6 knight and then go for d5, getting into some kind of opposite color bishop endgame where it is easy to get a draw. Black goes rook d8, rook d1, rook d7, king f1, and knight d5. So black finally managed to get the knight on d5. I think something like bishop f6 was also not really that bad, because after this and king f1, black can get the pawn, but at least white is getting into an opposite color bishop in game. But after king f1, knight d5, it is always going to be like a bishop versus knight, or the bad bishop versus good bishop in game. King e2, h6, bishop e3, knight e7. So the knight reroutes itself to f5, hitting d5, the rook coming to d6, and black will anyway get the d4 pawn. Bishop d3, rook d6, rook d2. Here I think black could have gone for knight c6 and just take the pawn, but Arjun doesn't really want the pawn, and he wants the whole game. He goes f5 here, which is very interesting, because now he's saying I'll go g5 and f4, go after that e3 bishop, and I don't see how you can go defend it. Bishop c4, g5, f4, g4. So with the f4 move, this bishop is now much worse than it was before, because it is just staring at his own pawns. And this e6 pawn is not really a weakness, because black can go king f7, knight d5 anytime he wants, and white can't really put pressure on the e6 pawn. So white goes rook b4, knight d5, bishop d5, rook d5, rook b6, king f7. So as I said before, now only the endgame that white can go is this bad bishop versus good bishop endgame, with pawns on all the white pawns on dark squares, targets for this bishop. That is rook d3, rook e7, rook b3, and bishop d4. So black takes the pawn here, and he goes into the rook endgame with the pawn up. Bishop d4, rook d4, rook b7. Here, white blunders, thinking that these two pawns will be enough compensation for these three pawns, but it is not really the case. Black goes rook e4, king d3, rook f4, rook e7, king e7, rook b7. The last way was to get rook b6 and take this pawn, because after rook b7, king f6, there is no check after taking the a6 pawn by going rook a7. The king is now very safe, and white doesn't really have much here. White goes b4, rook f2. If white goes something like b5, ab, a6, rook a2, a7, black can start pushing something this kind of pawns, like go rook a4 first, and then start pushing this e5 f4 pawn and create very strong pass pawns on the king side. So after rook b6, rook g2, rook a6, rook h2, rook a8, rook a2. Black has 4 pawns versus 2. Although these pawns are a bit fast at first glance, but because of the g pawn, it is no race. b5, g3, a6, h5. Here if white plays something like this, black can just go g2, rook g8, rook a6, rook g2 and rook b6. So black is 3 pawns up and is just clearly winning. So after king a3, black goes h6, rook g8, h3, rook g3, h2, rook h3, rook a3. So this is the only way to stop black from winning, and white goes for it, but this lands into a skewer. And here white, showing sportsman spirit, goes for king f4 and allowing Arjun to mate him with e5. So and with this win, India is now 3-0 up against Slovenia and is just crushing them. Move on to the final game, that is between Vidit and Matej Sebnik. Vidit was white. He goes for e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, the Rosolimo Sicilian, knight f6, knight c3, knight d4, e5, knight b5, knight d5, knight d5. So this is all very common theory. Again, we need to. Here black goes for d6, which is a bit new, I guess. So white goes e into d6. The best was to go for castle, because after e6, black can go a6, hitting the knight, knight c7, knight c7, dc7, queen c7, d3, bishop g4, bishop b2, queen c6. Black is just threatening to take here and double up white's pawns. Rook g1, preparing against bishop f3, f6. So f6 is a very nice move, just blunting this bishop, also threatening to go e5. White goes a4, rook c8, d3, queen e6. I guess queen e6 is a very timid move actually, because black has a very nice queen on c6 and this white queen is pinned by the g4 bishop, and he didn't really need to exchange the queens. Maybe something like e6 and bishop d6 castle was enough. But black goes queen e6, queen e3, g6 and a5. a5 is always a nice move to play, fixing these 2 pawns. Knight can come to c4 in the future. Rook c6, king f1. I don't really like king f1 because white should have gone something like knight d2. I can understand why he didn't go for this, because of bishop h6, queen e6, rook e6, knight e4. And this looks a bit clumsy here, but black can't really take advantage of the pin because f5 runs into bishop h8, and the one move that black needs to castle, white can just simply pick king f1 and get out of the pin. But he plays king f1 first, h5, queen f4, bishop h6, queen g3. White's position looks very clumsy here. These two bishops are super strong. The queen is strong. The pawn structure is very good for black. Black can get some h4 ideas in the future. Black goes king f7, h3, bishop f3. I think black should have gone for something like bishop f5 here, not giving up the pair of bishops. But black goes for bishop f3 here. Queen f3, rook d8. So black is trying to get the rook to f5 here. White goes for g4, breaking open the king side. Queen d5, rook d5, and rook a4. So now we can see the benefit of playing a5. The a rook gets the 4th rank for getting into the game, which is very beneficial in a lot of cases. Bishop g7, king e2, gh4, hg4, f5. So this is a bit Again a bit awkward move because white can simply go bishop g7, king g7, gf5, rook f5, and only white can try for a win here. Black didn't really need to go for f5, but after f5, white does really go for this, takes take, but he goes for g5 here. I can understand why he went for this, because he doesn't really want to exchange too many pieces and get two rooks on the h file, putting some mating nets on the king. But black just stops it with rook d4, rook c4, king f7, rook h1, king is. I think king f7 is also a very bad move because it doesn't really need to come here, as the only file that white can use to get into black's camp is the h file, and if the king is on g7, white can't really use it. King f7, rook h1, king e6, king e3, f4, king f3, king f5. So now it's becoming a bit awkward again. The g5 pawn is hanging, but white rook can enter the 7th rank and grab some pawns. Rook h7, rook c4, bc4, rook e6, again a nice move, guarding the e7 pawn and then threatening king g5. Rook h4, king g5, rook g4, king f6, rook f4, and king g7. So the pawns are equal. It's a rook game, but white has a slight plus because of this nice pawn structure. Black has 4 pawn islands almost, because these two are separated by this, and c5, e7, and g6. So white goes rook g4 here, rook g5, stopping any kind of rook g5 ideas, hitting the c5 pawn, rook g1, rook f5, king e3, rook e5, king d2, rook f5, rook f1. Rook f1 is very passive. I think if white really wanted to go for a win, he had to go something like rook b1, and he had to calculate this: rook f2, king e3, rook c2, rook b7, king f6, rook b6, e6, rook a6. But this also should be a draw. But this was the best chance for white. But after rook f1, king f7, f3, rook f6, king e3, rook e6 again, king f2. Black goes for b5, getting rid of the backward pawn on b7. A b6, rook b6. Now black has 4 proper islands, but white can't really take advantage of this. King e3, rook e6, king f4, rook e2, rook a1, e5 here, a nice move, getting rid of the king and also stopping him from going to e5, d5, and c5. So king g3, rook c2, rook a6, rook d2, rook d6, king e7, rook d5, and king e6. Although this rook has come to an outpost here, hitting both the rook pawns, black can just simply take here if white ever takes on c5. So white takes rook c5, rook d3, king g4, rook d4, king g3, king d6, rook c8, rook d7, rook c5, king d6, and they agree to a draw, because if the rook moves, it can just take the pawn, and if the rook moves here, again he can take the pawn, and if the rook moves to c5, he can again come back hitting the rook. So a draw was agreed here. India won with 3.5, and they have cleanly clinched the Chess Olympiad 2024 with a very, very impressive performance, only dropping 1 game in 11 rounds, which is against this kind of opposition is just super strong. So thank you everyone for watching. If you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe, and I'll keep putting videos in this channel of my games and of if there are more important tournaments or games. I guess I'll definitely cover the chess world championship, Gukesh versus Zing, if I am able to. But till then, I'll hopefully be posting regular videos of my games and any other interesting games, of course. So thank you everyone. See you tomorrow. Bye bye.